Welcome to the TalentGrow Show, where you can get actionable, results-oriented insight and advice on how to take your leadership, communication, and people skills to the next level and become the kind of leader people want to follow. And now, your host and leadership development strategist, Halelly Azulay.
Welcome back to the TalentGrow Show. This is Halelly Azulay. I'm your leadership development strategist with episode 39. This is a repeat visit by episode 26 guest, Don Watkins. And Don and I talk about mentoring, what it is, how to get a mentor, how to become a mentor, how to overcome the fear of asking someone for their mentorship and the worry that lots of people have about maybe not delivering value, or maybe that person wouldn't really want to be my mentor. So we talk about a lot of the very common questions lots of people have about this idea of mentoring. And we both share stories from our professional career and how we got mentors to help us and what things we did to make that relationship successful, and how we ourselves are also sometimes mentors to others. Some common mistakes people make, and definitely ending with actionable advice. So I hope you enjoyed this episode with Don Watkins, and here we go. By popular demand, I have Don Watkins back on the show. Listeners of the show might remember that he was a guest on episode 26 of the podcast, in which Don and I talked about common misconceptions and mistakes about career success and what motivates people to high performance. And we also talked about the key benefits of aligning your philosophy and your action. So Don is actually a very successful writer, author, speaker. He co-authored the national bestseller, Free Market Revolution, How Ayn Rand's Ideas Can End Big Government, and most recently, Equal is Unfair, America's Misguided Fight Against Income Inequality, which both of those he co-wrote with Yaron Brook. And Don also has a podcast, and he and I have both spoken at a conference that was for young people just starting out their career. And recently, we actually also engaged in mentoring Q&As for some of the members or some of the attendees of this conference. And this is how the idea for this podcast came up, because the topic that came up a lot was mentoring. And Don and I both have built our success with the help of mentors. And we know a thing or two about what makes a good mentor, how to be a good mentee or protégé. And I thought that it would be great to have Don back on to talk about this topic so that we can give you some ideas about what you can do to either become a mentor or get a mentor, and to make sure that we're all thinking on the same page with this. So Don, wow, that was a long introduction, longer than I expected. Welcome to the TalentGrow Show.
Hey, great to be back.
It's so good to have you back, and I really appreciate your time and agreeing to come back on. This, like I said, was spurred recently when, you were asked some questions about mentoring that were really questions that I also get a lot. And you had such great answers. I was like, oh my God, we have to record this for the TalentGrow Show. So I guess a good way to start and introduce the listeners to you, in case they didn't listen to episode 26, which I highly recommend that you do, or if they don't remember. Can you tell us, I guess, your story with relation to mentoring in terms of your career success?
Yeah, I mean, let me say what didn't happen. What didn't happen is that I read a book that said, hey, you need a mentor, and then I found one, and then all is well. I kind of stumbled into it, actually. I always knew I wanted to be a writer, and I guess the closest thing I had to any sort of mentor was I had one teacher in high school who was amazing. She was a former journalist, and she taught me a lot. But what ended up happening is I got invited to come work at the Ayn Rand Institute. And I had been writing on my own, but I didn't really know any other professional writers. I always wanted to be one, but had no clue how you did it. And I had some raw talent and some knowledge, but super rough around the edges would be putting it nicely. And then you mentioned that I also do public speaking. There, if you would have told somebody 10 years ago when I first started at the Ayn Rand Institute that I would be a public speaker, they would laugh at you because I couldn't order a sandwich from Subway without stuttering my way through it. And it was a complete disaster. But I got to the Institute, and I very quickly realized just from the people that I was working with how much I had to grow. And there was one person in particular, a guy named Ep039, who no longer works here, but runs his own Center for Industrial Progress. He in particular, his work really impressed me. The way that he went about his work really impressed me. And so, I mean, I basically chased him down like a teenager in love and tried to get as much feedback as I could to figure out, like, what is he doing differently in his thinking, in his work habits, in his approach than what I'm doing. And so there was never any formal relationship, and I didn't even think about it as mentorship. It was just somebody I would go to constantly, ask questions of, get feedback from, usually very painful feedback in the sense that it was properly very critical of what I was doing. And then I had the good fortune, and this is really great. If you can make this work, you're golden, to move in with him and live there for about a year and a half. And once again, it was just taking advantage of everything I could to get feedback. And one of the things that happened, I guess probably, 6 months or so into doing that, is I realized that when I was facing difficult problems, I could internally imagine, I couldn't figure out how to solve them, but I could eternally figure out, I could hear him lecturing me, even though he hadn't said, the exact words regarding this problem. This is how I would solve it, or this is how I would answer it. And of course, it wasn't really his voice. It was me just having internalized all those lessons. And I think that was one of the real key points in transitioning to being able to be a successful writer and speaker, was having worked with somebody closely enough that I could see how they thought and then put my own spin on it and be able to do what I was going to do. But without that individualized feedback, there's no way I would be where I am today.
Do you think that being able to put him into your mind, sort of, or put yourself into his shoes to think about your situation, was that a result of just repeated exposure to his commentary, such that you were able to predict it or to anticipate it?
Well, exposure is certainly one layer of it, but it takes more than that. And you can think this is wider than mentorship. I think about it as mentors and models are the two things you need.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a model is anybody who has done what you want to do or knows a lot about what you want to do, but you may or may not know them. They may or may not be alive. But whether it's a mentor or a model, you have to actually break down what they're doing to try to understand it. So it wasn't simply that, for instance, I read a lot of Alex's writing or listened to a lot of his Q&As. It's that I thought deeply about what makes this work. He made this point. I wouldn't have thought to make that point, or he used this kind of example, or, he started out a talk by asking a question of the audience rather than just going in material. Why? And just thinking very deeply, trying to break down and in effect backwards engineer what are the steps that he went through, what are the thinking strategies he used that I wasn't using. So I think you need exposure for sure, but exposure is not enough. There's people who, will read an author for 20 years and, they'll be able to tell you something about how the person thinks, but they won't master it, and it won't become their own method. Because what happens when you break it down is that you're making it not just I'm repeating something that I heard somewhere, you're making it your own, and ultimately you're putting your own spin on it, because part of breaking it down is thinking critically about, well, he does it this way, but in this case I disagree, right? You're judging it too. So if you wanted to kind of sum up what I think goes in, it's as much exposure as you can. It's really thinking deeply and breaking down what you see, and then judging it along the way. So it's not just here's somebody I'm going to copy thoughtlessly, but I'm going to think about what they're doing.
So thank you for sharing that story. And you are really fortunate. And I would imagine that one of the tips we probably will not be giving today is go find a mentor you can room with. It's not very likely.
I have the worst advice. Like in that same house is where I met my wife, because she moved into the house among other people too. And so people always ask, how do I meet a girl? And I say, wait till she moves in your place.
You're just unique and always lucky and unique. All right. Well, aside from that, I guess what I'd like to do is extrapolate principles that anyone can use from the specifics of your story and my story, because everybody's different, but there are things that you can emulate or replicate or mold into something that could work for you. And as you said it, you have to think critically. You can't just sort of completely mimic what someone else does or how someone else does it. You have to make it work for you. So something I want to talk about is how we might suggest that people get a mentor aside from the specifics of your situation. And I want to talk definitely about what's in it for both sides, because I know that one of the things that comes up a lot, I know you dealt with it in that Q&A I listened to, was the fear or concern or hesitation that a lot of people have in asking for mentorship from someone, because they're worried that it's an imbalanced relationship. It's not a give and take relationship. They think it isn't, and therefore they feel very ill at ease if they're a trade, a fair kind of equal trade oriented person who doesn't want to take advantage of anyone. And also because they're worried that the person will probably say no because they won't see what's in it for them. So I want to make sure we talk about that. So should we start with how to get a mentor, or what do you think? Should we talk about what's in it for both sides?
I think they go together really well. And if I miss something here, definitely feel free to chime in with your own thoughts. But I would say there's something right and something wrong with that attitude or that fear towards mentorship. The thing that's right is I think that most people go about pursuing mentorships in a really bad way, and they're usually not successful. And we could talk about that. But there's something really wrong in that one of the most pleasurable things for somebody who's successful is to help other people be successful, particularly when they can identify them. It's in effect like, how cool is it that I can, give my younger self what I wish I had when I was there? And you can even think about it in a practical sense. Here's a really high leverage way to get results in the world that I don't have to do, right? So I can only write so many books, but if I can give, 20 hours to somebody over a period of a year or two, and they can write a bunch of books that I like and think are valuable, that is a huge return on investment. And so then the question is, given that there is this value for the mentor, what do you need to do as a mentee in order to actually get feedback from the person? Now, I had a kind of unique scenario in that the person that I went to for mentorship was already incredibly successful in terms of the skills that I wanted, but he was not culturally successful, or he wasn't yet known in the industry. So there were fewer demands on his time. And so in that sense, I was benefiting from the fact that I had like a monopoly or close to a monopoly. But I think that's obviously the unusual case. I'll name kind of one thing that I think is a real key. And then I definitely want to hear what you have to say about this, because I think there's a lot that we can, there's a lot of advice you can give on getting a mentor. But the number one thing that you want to think about is that you want to keep it very low investment on the mentor's part. And part of the reason why is you want to show respect for the person's time, because even though it is a value to him or to her, is not as much of a value as it is to you. And you might be willing to sit with this person for hours. He might only be able to give you 20 minutes. And so the question is, all right, well, what do I do? And the number one thing you don't do, and this is the kind of mistake I see all the time, the number one thing you don't do is ask them a question that they've either already answered in some form that you could get, like in a book they've written would be the worst. Or you ask them a question that like Google could answer. So if it's in effect, how do I get a publisher, or how do I get an agent for a book? That is not a good question, because that is something that is standard, a standard question you can get logging on the internet for 5 minutes. If it's, how do I get a book about something that this author has written about that's kind of weird? Okay, that's a different scenario. But what you really want to do, at least at first, is you want to ask a concrete question that they can answer very quickly, so that it's low investment on their part. For example, hey, I'm writing a book. I was, I have these, I haven't decided on a title. What are, your best 2 suggestions for how to pick a title or something like that? And then the second part of that is you just go and do it. Don't argue with them, even if you disagree or think it's weird or it makes you uncomfortable because they're asking you to do something that is outside your comfort zone. Go do it and then report back the results. And then if you have a follow-up question, ask it. Because the number one thing that happens when people ask a successful person for advice is they ask for advice and then they don't take it. They don't do anything. They don't take any action. Usually, in fact, they argue because what they really want to be told is, hey, everything you're doing is perfect. But no, if you go and you take action and report the results, you go a really long way to securing somebody's interest in helping you in the future.
I think that's really wise advice, and it's a great way to think about it, right? So, I do have some ideas to add. So if you think the people that are worried about not giving value, and I love your advice of like, don't ask for a lot and think about that there is this potential value, and then make sure that you deliver on it, right? So that idea of ask for something small and then do it helps that mentor actualize that value of having seen the results in someone that they mentored, right? And so that gives them the motivation and the fuel to keep going. It incentivizes them to want to help you again because you gave them return on their investment, as you said. Something else that I've done successfully, actually, a mentor that I've had great success with, and I've been very fortunate, is someone who actually was already an author. Her name is Elaine Beek, and she already wrote like over 50 books when I was starting to write my book. And she helped me so much in terms of getting it published and getting it organized, and so many things she helped me with. But it was always, like you said, kind of piece by piece. I didn't come to her and ask her to just do everything for me. But the one thing that I've done both with her and with other mentors who have kind of high profile is I've also thought about what are other ways that a mentor might get value from the relationship that isn't necessarily like the same way that the mentee or the protege might. And one of the things that sometimes people really do find valuable, people who are successful, is to feel directly appreciation from the people who are consuming what they produce. So sometimes, they become kind of so high on a ladder, and they get kind of like fan communication, or people sort of like appreciating them in general. But it's rare, I think it's rare for them to develop a relationship with someone who is mainly a benefactor of their work, and to hear specifically what that person appreciates and to just receive their gratitude. And one of the things that I've done, and I suggest this to people, is if there's someone that you admire, someone that you want to emulate, someone that you might want to learn from, before you ever hit them up for any give me, right? Before you ask them for anything, give them. And so giving them specific gratitude, showing up as a person who is grateful, showing up as a person who appreciates them, showing up as a person who just kind of boosts them or promotes them or brags about them or comments positively on their social media shares. And again, in a sincere way, not in a brown-nosing kind of way. I mean, you do sincerely appreciate them, but you have to tell them that. But then you start showing up on their radar as someone, if you think about like this virtual scale of giving and taking, you're giving and you're not taking anything. So
let me say something about that, because I think that is such great advice, and it connects to one of the points I was making, which is, when you're, even before you have somebody as a mentor, you can use them as a model. And we talked about, you're really trying to break down and think about at a fine grain level what they're doing. And when you can ask a question that shows you've noticed subtleties in what they're doing,
mm-hmm.
You used to use this example, but now you use this example, or you used to use this phrase. When you show that kind of subtlety and understanding, that conveys appreciation in a way that's so much more genuine than just saying, "Oh, I love your work. It's great." And I found that means the most when people do it to me, and then it's gotten the best response when I do it to other people, because the eternal frustration of a successful person is not that they're not praised enough. It's that people don't necessarily understand what they value in their work, what they think is really good.
Yeah. And so if you do that for that person, you're on their radar as like, a great person. They appreciate you a lot. So when you come to them with that one specific, not too hard to answer kind of question, they're very likely to give you of their time, and much more than you ask for most of the time. So it starts that ball rolling where you're ensuring that it's it's a good trade where you're giving value. You don't have to give them like your expertise, because people think, well, I'm just really young, or I'm just starting in this career, or what do I know about being an author? Well, you know about reading from that author. You know about appreciating that person's way of thinking. Whatever specifics of consuming what that person has created, and those are values to the author or to the mentor.
Yeah, no, I think that's really terrific advice. Again, like this all comes under the umbrella of that you should view it as, how do I make this a trade that both sides win? And I think we talk about win-win relationships a lot, but win-win doesn't simply mean that I want both sides to win. It's that I'm actively thinking about how both sides can win. I'm looking to make sure and find ways that the other side can win and that I can as well.
Yeah. And then, when you were describing your way of suggesting that the person ask, you're filtering, right? You're not like bombarding them with everything you ever wanted to know from them, but you're saying, I don't want to tax them too much. How can I come to the most essential question I can possibly ask, or like that first domino, and then deliver results on that? So it's like, that win-win doesn't also have to happen. It's not like a tit for tat or a quid pro quo, and it doesn't all have to be start and finish within one interaction. If you're thinking long-term and long-term relationship and mutually beneficial relationship, the give and take happens over the long run.
Yeah, and definitely when I talk about kind of ask for the least possible, this is early in a relationship. Some mentorships remain pretty, it can be somebody who's famous and far apart from you, and you only interact a couple times a year. Often it will develop more closely, and there just the natural flow of the relationship will mean that you can have more in-depth conversations, you can ask more in-depth questions. The point is, at the beginning, how do you establish that relationship? And there it's very important not to be presumptuous. Yeah.
And something that you can do is also offer value. So for example, maybe I don't have the knowledge, but I'm a potential test market. Like Elaine, my mentor, has sent me things to read and to respond to, just sort of give her feedback from a fresh perspective or a different viewpoint. Or she's asked me if I could do this or that. She's asked me for favors over the years. And I'm so happy that she did, because it allows me to sort of pay her back, for her knowledge and her investing in me. So there's lots of ways that by developing that relationship, you could completely provide reciprocal value, because there's different things that you can do. And by the way, one of the things that I talk about when I talk about developing leaders, if somebody wants to develop their leadership skills and their coaching skills, a mentorship is an amazing way to do it, right? Because you're not like on the job as a leader, you are sort of doing it on the side, and you're honing your skills as a leader, and you're getting feedback about that. And many people would really love that. So let's say if they're not like a famous author, famous speaker, or whatever, there's something they're trying to work on. There's something they're trying to develop, and you could help them get there.
Yeah, for sure.
So I guess I think that we just gave some ideas about how to be a good mentee. In general, we included those in our commentary. And we talked about mistakes that lots of people make. So how to be a good mentee, how to be a good mentor. Any other thoughts about that from you?
Well, let me stress another side of it, which is, in effect, it's the flip side of don't be too demanding, don't be too presumptuous, which is you need to be active, you need to be the driver, and don't be afraid to take those steps, and keeping in mind that you want to be respectful of their time. That doesn't mean being timid or anything like that. Steve Jobs had this great video where he's talking about a lot of his success was from asking, and that most people didn't ask. And ask can mean anything. In his case, I think he gave the example of when he was young and called up Hewlett Packard, got one of the founders on the phone and asked for certain parts that he wanted to build who knows what gadget, and he got a job at Hewlett Packard then during the summer as a kid. And that was actually one of the lessons I learned from Alex that wasn't directly work related, but much broader than that, was that he was not afraid to ask people just for all sorts of favors, all sorts of things. And the worst that happens is they say no. And there have been other people who I've even tried to develop a mentor relationship with, i.e., I wanted some advice or feedback from them. And sometimes it just didn't work out. They, for whatever reason, weren't interested, or I just went about it in a wrong way. But but you don't want to be so respectful of another person's time that you don't ask for any of it. So, be active, but just keep in mind that they're not there to serve you, because I don't think anybody in your audience would make this mistake. But the frightening part is I see it so much where there is this kind of entitlement that you'll see, particularly from very young people, asking for assistance or asking for help. I would say a minor thing is, you don't start out by going, "Will you be my mentor?"
Yes, right.
That is you're asking for commitment from the person well beyond anything that they should be willing to give you at that point.
Yeah.
What you're asking for is you're asking for answers to questions. You're asking for feedback. You're asking for concrete things that over time may or may not grow into, a full-blown mentorship.
I'm so glad you said that. That is so true. I mean, it's like will you marry me? I've never met you. It's just, why would you do that? But it's a great point, because I've actually had so many mentors, but I've never had one that we officially had some kind of a title like that, like they were my mentor, I was their protege. They don't even know, sometimes I talk about somebody and I say they're my mentor and they're like, "Oh, I didn't know I was your mentor," because it's not important what you brand it. And I know that a lot of organizations have or create mentoring programs, and people can kind of sign up to be a mentor, but you don't need an official program and you don't need an official mentor badge to have a mentor. So I love your suggestion. It's just like, ask a question, and then if it seems welcome and you're definitely delivering a value on implementing their suggestions, then ask another question. And you don't know what you can or cannot get if you don't ask. And the worst that can happen is they will say no. And one of the things that I teach about this is that, in my opinion, the mentorship relationship should be driven by the mentee or the protege. Like, they should bear the brunt of the work in terms of administrative details, in terms of setting things up, in terms of following up. I mean, just that's another way for you to provide a service. Take that off of the other person's shoulders. Don't have them have to deal with any of it. You can just take care of it and make it easy for them to help you.
Yeah, I think that's right. But I'm curious what you think about the answer to this question, which is, I think there's a lot of people out there who would like to, fill that mentor role for people, and they don't, and they, they don't happen to have anybody who's pursuing it for whatever reason. Do you have any thoughts on how to, pursue a mentor relationship from the other side?
That's a good question. Well, first of all, there are programs. So I think that there's probably a lot, if you work for a corporation or an organization, they may well have one, and you can inquire. Probably it's administered by like human resources department or something like that. But also within the community, there are a lot of times that there are these nonprofit organizations, associations that set up mentoring programs. And so if you have some kind of a passion around something, or some kind of domain expertise on something, there may be an association, a trade program, or some kind of an organization that helps people develop skills or communicate with other people that are interested in that. And that could be a place where you could find that there already is some kind of a mentoring program, and often they're searching for you and they just would love to meet you. But if not through an official program, or if you can't find one of the things that I've done is just take interest in people that are at the beginning of their way. Like, for example, the program that I just mentioned, it was through networking that I was able to speak at that conference where, we both spoke, and then they asked if I would do the Q&A. But I also met some people at that conference who seemed kind of thirsty for knowledge. I appreciated that. Like, they talked to me in the hall. They seemed really interested in what I had to say. They asked me a lot of curious questions, and they didn't pursue a mentorship. But I did invite them to keep in touch with me, and we connected like on LinkedIn, or, we exchanged business cards and so on. And therefore, I was able to kind of comment and see what they're doing. And I've shown interest in those people. I've shown appreciation for their work, or I've given them like compliments or kudos, let's say if they published an article or something like that. And I think that sometimes when you show up for people that could be your protege in that way, in that kind of a supportive way, it creates a very warm and inviting atmosphere to build that kind of a relationship. What do you think?
Yeah, well, no, as you were talking about that last point, I realized, well, that's what I've actually done. Again, with usually these things, I kind of stumble into them and then look back and go, oh, that's what happened. But there's a couple people I have that sort of relationship with, and almost always it was because I spotted them when they were, just starting out, and I thought they were really talented. And so kind of I went out of my way to make myself available and, do whatever I could and let them know that the door was always open, even though my door is always literally closed, because I was really excited about their talent and ability. And I think, showing that enthusiasm it does lend itself to that open door. I don't believe in necessarily offering unsolicited advice to people, but showing your enthusiasm and then being willing to answer questions or provide assistance, I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, I like that. All right. Well, I know that time is ticking, and I want to make sure that we wrap up with actionable tips. So what would you say from your perspective is something that whoever's listening right now can do right away to move forward towards a mentoring relationship that is of value to them?
So I'll say two things. One is cheating, and I always like to cheat in these questions by just referencing a book that has lots of advice. And this is one that I think you've already heard me make, which is Robert Greene has a book called Mastery that came out a few years ago. And a huge portion of the book, I don't know, maybe a third of it or something, is all about this question and has, I think, the best advice, not only in how to get a mentor, but how to use one and how to evolve to the point where you're not just a dim reflection of them. So I highly recommend that as a resource for somebody who's interested in more kind of thinking about this whole process. And then I would say, in terms of like, anytime you get inspired with advice, you should figure out, what can I do right now in the next 10 minutes? And I would say a really good thing is just make a list of everybody who has some skill or even is successful overall in the field or in the endeavor that you want to be successful at. Like, as many people as you're genuinely interested in. And then, if they're dead, that's great. You can just use them as a model and think about how they do what they do. But if not, just figure out, all right, what is one piece of advice that I could ask them for? And then, figure out a way to email them. And most people, including people who are famous, there's some way to get in touch with them. And just send that, brief introduction. Hey, I like your work for XYZ reasons. I had this question, and then go take action and report back.
Awesome advice. And by the way, you don't even have to have their email, because if most people are connected on Twitter, on LinkedIn, maybe Instagram, so there are ways for you to actually hit them directly on their smartphone wherever they are, and probably not go through any kind of gatekeepers or filters. And just remember that if you show up as appreciative, specifically, as sincerely as possible, you're much more likely to get their attention and to get them interested in you than if you show up as needy, or if you show up as mooching, like just give me. So be filtered in what you ask for, and be sincerely grateful and appreciative. I would add to your great suggestions. And by the way, thank you for referring me to that book, because right after I heard you mention it before, I bought it and I started reading it this weekend, and I can already see I'm going to love it. That I would say, start seeding. I like to call this seeding, and I don't mean this in like some kind of an insidious way, but think about the people that could potentially be mentors to you and whom you really appreciate or admire, and just start vocalizing your appreciation for them with zero expectations. Because first of all, there's no harm in doing that, and no one ever feels like they're appreciated enough. And so you're doing something amazing, and it will feel good to you as well, but it'll start to seed that relationship imbalance where you've given more than you were asking for. So who knows in the future, if you might want to ask them for something, they know you already as, oh, that really nice fellow from Twitter. Oh, that really kind woman from such and such. So that would be something that I would suggest you do in addition to what Don suggested. So Don, thank you for engaging with me in this conversation. It always feels like too quick, and I want to talk to you for at least another 2 hours. How can people stay in touch with you and learn more from you and about you?
Well, now I have to give out a Twitter address, don't I? Although, I mean,
and you might get asked for stuff.
well, that's fine. If they could dig up Pony Express, they can use that too. But in the meantime, at dwatkins3, that's the number 3. And then the easiest way to follow, what I'm up to is at donswriting.com, all one word. No parenthesis or no apostrophe. I don't know if there's any of your listeners who could possibly make that mistake, but definitely no apostrophe in the URL.
Okay, great. And I'm gonna link to that in the show notes and everything else that we mentioned. And Don is a very deep and brilliant thinker and writer and speaker. So I do hope and suggest that you follow him and his work. And thanks for coming back on the Talent Grow Show, Don. I hope that we'll go for number 3 soon. But until then, I hope you make today great.
It's been fun. Thank you.
You are very welcome. I hope that you gained lots of value from that episode with Don Watkins and myself riffing on mentoring, and that you will take action. We probably gave you a lot of different things you can take action on. So my suggestion for you is start with something, start with baby steps, but put something into action today. And that will set the wheels in motion and will get the ball rolling and whatever other cliche you want to use. Definitely check out the show notes page where we link to everything that was mentioned and, of course, all the ways to get in touch with Don. And that's on www.talentgrow.com/podcast/episode 39. And if you haven't yet downloaded my free tool called 10 Mistakes Leaders Make and How to Avoid Them, I really think that you should, because it's free and it can help you. Don't make these same mistakes I see over and over by a lot of people that are practicing leadership. So go get that tool. That will also help you get in touch with me through my biweekly newsletter, which is always short, always fun, always upbeat, and always useful. And of course, if you don't like it, you can always unsubscribe. So go grab that. That's right. There's a link to it also on the show notes page. And shout out on iTunes is always welcome. So if you haven't taken the time to do that, it'll take like maybe 4 minutes of your time. All you do is just click the ratings, give us a rating. I hope 5 stars, but whatever you think. And then just maybe add a review that's like 1, 2, 3 sentences long. It does not take a long time. And you can always use an alias if you don't want to use your real name. All right. Well, I thank you for listening to another episode of the Talent Grow Show. I hope that it was valuable to you. I hope that you feel it was something that was a good use of your time, and maybe someone else that you know could also benefit from it. So send it over to them. And until the next time, make today great.
Thanks for listening to the Talent Grow Show, where we help you develop your talent to become the kind of leader that people want to follow. For more information, visit talentgrow.com.